Once home to kings and queens, palaces were built not only to act as royal residences but to project power and prestige. As such, monarchs and emperors vied with one another, commissioning lavish summer homes and assembling exquisite art collections with which to fill their endless halls and royal chambers. You are watching Yocotox. We are showing you the most beautiful palaces in the world. Let's count down from 5. Topkapi Palace. The Topkapi Palace was the imperial residence of the Ottoman Sultan and home to his court and harem. It was also the center of the state administration. Construction on the palace started in 1459 and was completed in 1478, making it the Ottomans' second palace in Istanbul. The Topkapi housed each of the Ottoman sultans from Sultan Mehmed II to Sultan Abdülmecid, covering nearly 4 centuries and 25 sultans. As each succeeding sultan ascended to the throne, he added parts to the palace, indicating the different tastes and styles of architecture over 4 centuries. The changes were made for reasons of practicality, to commemorate victorious campaigns, or to repair damage caused by earthquakes and fire. In 1924, the palace was turned into a museum. A kind of humble simplicity and practicality is found in the Ottoman palaces. The Topkapi was a city palace with a population of approximately 4,000 people, covering an area of 70 hectares. The first courtyard, which was open to the public, was the service area of the palace, consisting of a hospital, a bakery, an arsenal, the mint, storage places, and some dormitories. The Byzantine Church of Hagia Irene was located here too. It was utilized as an armory. The second courtyard, also called Divan Madani, was the seat of the divan and open to anyone who had business with the divan. This was the administration center of the empire. In addition to the divan, there were also the privy stables and kitchens. In the kitchens today, a collection of Chinese porcelain, which are accepted as the third most valuable in the world, are on display along with authentic kitchen utensils and both Turkish and Japanese porcelain. This has in treasury houses an exhibition of armory. The harem was the part of a Muslim house dedicated to the family and closed to the outside world. It was in these special quarters of the Ottoman palace that the dynasty lived. Non-Muslim concubines were sometimes accepted in the palace harem. Thus, they had a chance to become part of the dynasty as sultan's wives and even becoming queen mother. In most cases, however, they married Ottoman bureaucrats. Number 4. Palace of Versailles. The royal palace of Versailles is a well-known symbol of profligacy, and it's steeped in turbulent history. 3 French kings ruled from the palace amidst staggering opulence, each adding their own touches and renovating to suit their personal needs. Between 1682 and 1789, Versailles was the fulcrum of social and political power in France. King Louis XIV embarked on a project to extend his father's former hunting lodge into a palace of gargantuan proportions and simultaneously to cement his authority as absolute ruler. After relocating the royal family, Louis XIV moved his entire court and government to the palace. Away from interference, the French aristocracy lived alongside politicians in a hermetically sealed world of gilded luxury. Beyond the walls, however, resentment bubbled away, out of sight and out of mind. Housing close to 10,000 people within the palace walls at its peak, the Palace of Versailles aimed to assert political and artistic superiority over the rest of the world. But instead of solidifying the monarchy's power as Louis XIV had planned almost a century earlier, its isolationism only enraged the common people. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted. Aristocrats and politicians alike were brutally guillotined by the Republican uprising and King Louis XVI was deposed. The royal family were spared no mercy. Both king and queen were sentenced to death by guillotine, charged with a plethora of crimes including sexual promiscuity and high treason. After the revolution, the emergent French Republic commandeered parts of the palace for their National Assembly and Senate. Many paintings were requisitioned as public property, and Versailles was eventually preserved as the historical museum you see today. Number 3. Alhambra. One of the most popular tourist sites in Spain, the Alhambra is an ancient palace and fortress on the outskirts of the southern town of Granada in Andalusia. Constructed by the Moors who invaded the country from the 8th century onwards, it is a fine example of the hybrid style known as Mujar art and a powerful symbol of Spain's multicultural past. The first signs of construction date back to at least the Roman times and can be attributed to the site's advantageous position with good visibility of the surrounding area. However, it wasn't until the 14th century that the foundations of the Alhambra as it is known today were laid. Since the 8th century, Spain had been invaded by the Moors who had successfully established emirates and caliphates in most of the major provinces. It was in the mid-13th century that the Moorish emir Muhammad bin Alhambra commissioned the palace's construction, which was eventually turned into a royal palace by Yusuf I Sultan of Granada in the mid-14th century. The palace was designed in the typical fashion popular among Muslim rulers on the peninsula at the time, featuring the presence of horseshoe arches, arabesques and calligraphy. However, soon the Moorish rule came to an end as the Spanish kings launched the Reconquista and reclaimed their land. In the year 1492, the Emir of Granada surrendered the Emirate of Granada to the Catholic kings of Spain, King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile, who soon made it the home of the royal court. Under Christian ownership, the Alhambra underwent significant refurbishment and restructuring in accordance with the Renaissance style of the time. The structure grew into the large complex of rooms, palaces, courtyards, chambers, and gardens that visitors can admire today. The parks and gardens that surround the edifice are a testimony of its multicultural past. The roses, myrtles and orange trees planted by the Moors contrast beautifully with the lush forest of English elm trees offered by the Duke of Wellington in 1812. The Alhambra has been inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List since 1984 and has inspired a number of references in local culture. Number 2. Winter Palace. Winter Palace, former royal residence of the Russian Tsars in St. Petersburg, on the Neva River. Several different palaces were constructed in the 18th century, with the fourth and final version built in 1754-62 by Baroque architect Bartolomeo Francesco Rastrelli. It was restored following a fire in 1837, though the destroyed interior was largely redesigned. The palace is now part of the Hermitage Art Museum. The first winter palace was constructed in 1708 for Peter I. 3 years later, the small wooden building was replaced by a stone palace. In the early 1730s, Bartolomeo Francesco Rastrelli was commissioned by Empress Anna to design a bigger residence, and it was finished in 1735. Elizabeth subsequently requested renovations to create a palace of unparalleled opulence, and Rastrelli ultimately designed a new building that was to become a masterpiece of Russian Baroque architecture. Work began in 1754, with more than 4,000 people involved in the construction of the 460-room structure. Completed in 1762, the Fourth Winter Palace became known for its elegance and luxury. The three-story building was built around a quadrangle, and although each of the four facades were unique, they all featured white columns against a sandy pink background, with golden stucco moldings. The 176 sculptured figures that lined the roof added to the palace's striking appearance. After Catherine II assumed the throne in 1762, she dismissed Rastrelli and had much of the Baroque interior replaced with neoclassical designs. In 1837, the building's interior was destroyed by a fire, and 4 years later restoration work was completed. Although the neoclassical look was retained, many new designs were introduced. The slightly damaged exterior, however, was rebuilt according to Rastrelli's plans. Painted various colors over the years, the current palace's exterior is largely green and white. After Nicholas II was overthrown during the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Winter Palace became a museum. Number 1. Forbidden City. Forbidden City, Chinese Zhijinqing Imperial Palace Complex at the heart of Beijing, China. Commissioned in 1406 by the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, it was first officially occupied by the court in 1420. It was so named because access to the area was barred to most of the subjects of the realm. Government functionaries and even the imperial family were permitted only limited access. The emperor alone could enter any section at will. The 178-acre compound was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987 in recognition of its importance as the center of Chinese power for 5 centuries, as well as for its unparalleled architecture and its current role as the Palace Museum of Dynastic Art and History. The architecture of the walled complex adheres rigidly to the traditional Chinese geomantic practice of Feng Shui. The orientation of the Forbidden City, and for that matter all of Beijing, follows a north-south line. Within the compound, all the most important buildings, especially those along the main axis, face south to honor the sun. The buildings and the ceremonial spaces between them are arranged to convey an impression of great imperial power, while reinforcing the insignificance of the individual. The Forbidden City ceased to be the seat of Qing imperial government with the Chinese Revolution of 1911-12. Although some of the ancient buildings were lost to the ravages of the revolution, and during the war with Japan, the site was maintained as a hold. Pai, the last Qing emperor, was permitted to live there after his abdication, but he secretly left the palace in 1924. In the late 20th century, several of the palace buildings were restored. So you got it. The most beautiful palaces in the world. Which is your favorite? Comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in next video.